Well, good morning. It is Friday, May 1st, and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, I'm Managing Director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. We are ending week 7 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. U.S. unemployment claims have surged to over 30 million Americans in 6 weeks. Dr. Fauci has indicated optimism that a vaccine could be available as early as January. And our topic today is philanthropy on the front lines during the COVID pandemic. Our guest is my dear friend, Wes Moore, the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation. It's great to see you, Wes. I'd be remiss if I didn't note that we were together in person for the last kind of event I ever did, right? In mid-February when you came to Washington and you were at the New America Foundation with a Social Innovation Summit. So good to see you again.
It's great.
Under crazy circumstances.
It's great to see you. It's amazing how different the world was just weeks ago when we were together, man.
Unbelievable. And you know, it's funny because when we were together, we spent a lot of time talking about your role at Robin Hood, about what Robin Hood does as the leading anti-poverty fighting organization. And I remember walking out of there just being, these challenges are so daunting. And what's on your plate, your team's plate, how difficult it is. And now I can't even imagine how much crazier things are on your end. And for working families around this country. So maybe give us a kind of 30,000-foot view of how the world has changed in your eyes for the people you're trying to serve every day.
Yeah, if we just look at what's happened over the past 4 or 5 weeks, right? We essentially have watched 11 years of job gains go away in a month. 11 years of job gains gone in a month. We have watched a level of economic protraction and contraction that we just have never seen before. When you consider the level, when you consider the speed, when you consider the severity. And I think actually one of the things that is most complicated about this whole thing is we don't know what the bottom looks like yet. The thing that we know is that there's still so many other pieces to this puzzle and so many other factors that have to get factored in. And so in many ways, it's forcing all of us to be able to not just rethink how we were doing our work and how we're positioning ourselves, but also, as in the old military expression of stay frosty, which basically means that, stay cool because the situation is probably going to change. It's forcing all of us to also, be strong, be assertive, and stay frosty, because the conditions on the ground continue to move so swiftly that we're then forced to respond and react to it. I think about even with our own organization, we've built up and launched up a relief fund, and we did it, really in days, as we saw this crisis unfolding. And even now in the time that we've had it up in the process of 40 days, raised over $42 million that is going out, and of that, almost half of it is already out the door. And so it's coming in, and we're incredibly thankful for the big-hearted, nature of people who supported it. And also, when you think about the speed that's going out when it comes to supporting emergency operations for organizations and direct cash assistance, particularly for people who've been left out of a lot of stimulus programs, that's really where we decided to direct it.
And you also, I think you have over 220 organizations that have received some of those funds. How are you deciding what types of organizations, what buckets? I remember when we were talking last, we asked, is it education? Is it, child care? Is it this? You're like all the above. Yes, yes to everything. So, how are you in this kind of rapidly evolving space trying to make those decisions?
It's really interesting because I think that the space that we find ourselves in is that, that part of our goal and part of our mandate is going to be speed. Because this thing is evolving so quickly, and you're watching everything from, the way small businesses are now having to adapt, many of which will not survive.
Yeah.
We're seeing the same thing in the nonprofit space. And people forget the nonprofit space is not just the largest social service provider in terms of social background and social infrastructure that we have in our society. It's also one of the largest employers. Yep. And so they then also are now forced to kind of, move and pivot. And so, speed in the way we actually move capitals becomes incredibly important. We've always prided ourselves on being a data-driven organization. I know I'm a data-driven leader. I rely on data. to be able to help determine what decisions are the right decisions and what decisions are the ones that need to be either reinforced or readjusted. The thing that I also know, though, is in these circumstances, the people, as we say as an organization, the ones who are closest to the challenge oftentimes are the ones who are closest to the solutions that we're trying to find as well. And so one of the things we've really been pushing on with this as well is when we're thinking about cash allocations that are going either to individuals or organizations, a lot of this is about the sharing of power, and the sharing of autonomy. And because people know where their cash needs should go. People know where their cash needs are. And I feel like this has actually been an important opportunity for philanthropy, oftentimes to rethink what does it mean to share power and authority with people when you know that it's not just transparency and efficacy, but also speed is crucially important in this kind of moment.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked about this for a while, right? Like philanthropy wasn't necessarily a sector, I think, that you maybe envision yourself going into, but you realize here and now you have this ability to be the catalyst to test new ideas, be out there in the streets, figuring out what's going on and bumping it up. How are you seeing things differently? Usually it's a methodical kind of process, I imagine. You're data-driven, but now this is a roll-up-your-sleeves kind of moment over the last 6 weeks. How are you trying to collect data, right? Like one of the things that we heard from David Clooney from Black Economic Alliance, I don't know if you know David, but a lot of our conversation was about data, right? Like one of the potential silver linings of this, and there's not many, but we really on these talks want to talk about what positive things we can kind of take from this and build upon, is the real keen kind of a spotlight on the inequity of the impact of COVID across this country, especially in communities of need, right? So, that data isn't that fresh, isn't that real, isn't really being captured, right? But, it's clearly happening. So how are you trying to kind of capitalize that data, be nimble, but be quick at the same time while always being ever frosty?
It's a great question, Ken. And honestly, it's one of the things that I think for all of us, we have to go and push where the data continues to lead us, no matter what the data is telling us, right? And I know I was actually talking with David about this recently. I'm actually a board member for the Black Economic Alliance. But we think about this a lot, right? And so take small businesses as one example. Just as one example, right? We know for a fact that the impact that small businesses have on our larger economic growth, that approximately, around 30 million small businesses, and nearly 7.5 million small businesses that we have in this country right now are at risk of closing. Right now, right? And if you disaggregate that data and you look at the impact that small businesses have on communities of color and the impact of both WBEs and MBEs, right? So the women-owned businesses and the minority-owned businesses. And you look at the fact that over half of the businesses, that exist in communities of color are small businesses that are generally MBEs. And take a look, for example, at things like the PPP, right? So the PPP was a program that was built and publicly stated, in fact, that we're going to support so many of these small businesses, support so many of these entrepreneurs to be able to both keep people on payroll and to be able to keep these small businesses going. And you look at the fact that when you think about the impact that this has had on communities of color, and you look at the fact that of the PPP, 3% of the PPP have gone to MBEs. Yeah. So that's a perfect example of where we're creating policy that isn't following data, right? The data is screaming at us how we should be thinking about this work, how we should be thinking about, the specific focus areas, the specific earmarking, et cetera. But we're not then reinforcing it with policies that's actually addressing what the data is telling us. And so part of it is how are we going about working with in our case, our community partners and our community members to be able to assess and understand what the data is and what the data is giving us. But then once you know the information, if you don't act on it, that then is on you. Yeah. That then becomes a moral question about, now that we know what the data is telling us, we know what the disparity is telling us. If we're not then moving and adjusting our policies and our philosophies to be able to address that, then the question isn't about the data anymore. The question is about the people who are in charge. Have we not figured out a way of actually reconciling that?
Well, I was really excited to see this week that you got appointed by Governor Cuomo to the planning committee, the advisory board to plan about how to reopen New York, right? And I think what's so important about you and your voice is ensuring not only that your focus is in the community gathering intel and data, but also pushing it up to decision makers that can scale it, right? That's I think the kind of unique spot that you're in. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what you hope to accomplish just on that committee now?
Yeah, no, sorry, and I'm honored that the governor asked me to join, and honored because this is a crucial conversation that we're going to have, and one that is going to be a data-driven and a heart-led conversation. And that really is the philosophy that I think that I know the governor is approaching to it, and I know how I approach a lot of these problems, that we're going to be data driven and we're going to be heart led. And it's complicated, right? Because it's never going to be, there's not a singular question that we then have to factor in when we think about when the governor has to think about how exactly they're going to make this. And so all the council and work that we will do to be able to help with that process knows that there's certain factors and considerations that I will always keep at the forefront of my mind. One is, I know that every decision that I will make and every piece of counsel that I will give will always be through the lens of how is this impacting the most vulnerable. Always, no matter what the decision is. That's going to be my default. How is this going to impact the most vulnerable in our society, the most vulnerable, the people who where we want to make sure that our society is a place where opportunity meets aspiration. And so we know there's a lot of factors that are going to play into that. We know there's going to be questions about childcare. We know there's going to be questions about transportation. We know there's going to be questions about proper training, and also how do we keep a measure of social distancing, because again, you cannot separate the science from the economics of all this right now. The science is really going to help to lead the charge as to what is going to be safe in the proper way for us to go through this process. And then also, I think, we are going to have to come up with a full understanding of the fact that this has to be a fully integrated process, not just intra-community, but inter-community. What's happening in New York City is still going to not just help to be shaped, but also will help determine the fate of what happens upstate. What happens in New York will also help determine the fate of what happens in Maryland, because people will be moving back and forth from state to state. What happens in the United States will help determine the fate of what's happening in Italy and Spain and Greece and everywhere else around the world. And so it really does, it's going to behoove us to really have a very interconnected process where it's not just all voices are heard, but all understanding of the data and the implications are then being processed and internalized as we're making every form of recommendations about how do we smartly and equitably reopen this economy.
So how difficult do you think it is to do that when it's really been almost like a message that every state is kind of on its own to make its own decisions, right? I mean, today is May 1st, Texas is opening back up. Governor Hogan in Maryland is getting some pressure to speed up an opening in there. New York is doing the same, Virginia. It seems like everyone's kind of on their own, kind of trying to figure out how to do that. But to your point, we're all connected, right? Like all of this is going to we're all going to impact each other. So how do you think about that broader kind of roadmap to recovery and reopening?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge and the challenge of it is that it's also not the way it works, right? I mean, I could easily wake up in the morning and speak with my wife and my two children and say, okay, James, you're going to do X, Mir, you're going to do Y, Dawn and I are going to do X, Y, and Z, and it might for a second, but it's some things that all individuals within our household are doing are going to impact what's happening with someone else in the household, right? The way we have to think about this structure is absolutely no different. So we can have, so I believe in the idea of federalism, in the fact that we need to give our governors real authority about how they think about their own, how they think about their own states. I believe deeply in the idea and the concept that governors should have forms of authority about how they're talking about the individual businesses within and the individual organizations within their own individualized jurisdictions. I believe in that deeply. I also believe there is nothing that Larry Hogan is going to decide that is not also going to have some form of impact on what's happening in Delaware and Virginia and Washington, D.C., and also vice versa, right? And so there has to be a difference between measures of authority and understandings of accountability. We're all collectively accountable for how we are going to control this virus and how our individualized jurisdictions are going to be able to respond and recover and thrive.
Mhm.
And so I think all that has to get factored in. And again, the only way that we're going to be able to do that is respecting federalism, but also understanding the importance of a national conversation around this.
So let's talk real quick about the federal government's role, right? We had a $2 trillion relief package, right? I don't even want to call it a stimulus. It was really a relief effort.
Yep.
More down the pike, more being negotiated and discussed in Washington every day. To your point, PPP hasn't really reached those communities, individuals that the data shows need it the most. What needs to be done at the federal level to kind of support the work that you're doing on a daily basis? Because obviously you can only do so much, right? Like if we want real macro, Robinhood doesn't have capacity to do trillions of dollars worth of work, right? So no matter what, we need scaled support. So.
That's right. And I think part of it, as we're thinking about these new rounds of financing and the way we're going to think about, kind of our collective economics. So one, you're absolutely right. We need to think about who PPP and these initial rounds did not reach, mm-hmm. right? So we know that it did not reach many of the small business owners who needed it most, mm-hmm. And specifically at a speed in which we needed it. So we know we're going to have to make adjustments on really focusing it and pushing it towards the small business, which really is the economic engine of how our country works and how our country moves and operates. We also know that there's certain individuals that even the individual cash assistance did not reach, and that was also by design. So for example, people who are undocumented immigrants, they were not part of the individual cash assistance, even though they're very much part of our economy. They're taxpayers, but we're not part of individual cash assistance. We also know the people who are in mixed status families. So for example, even if you are documented, but you have family members that are not documented, you did not receive individual cash assistance. We know people that were really part of that larger working poor population that were not making enough money, even if you had employment, but you weren't making enough money to pay taxes. You were not part of that. These are people who were also before COVID-19 were significantly suffering. And so how we think about a plan and a package that is supporting the millions of Americans who were left out in the prior ones, I think becomes crucially important. The second piece is how we are then thinking about the long-term build out of what it is that we're trying to get done. One of the things I think, I believe deeply in the role of philanthropy to be catalytic, and we've spoken about that before. But I also know the reality is that, we are funding and have funded job training programs, for example, that in some cases are working and training in jobs that are now gone, and in many cases won't return, right? And so how then are we thinking about job training mechanisms, and how exactly do we have public, private, and philanthropic partnerships that are actually training people for jobs that we know that there is a significant need for, and we also have a massive dearth of people involved in those industries. Mm-hmm. So a perfect example, I think about the nursing industry. Mm-hmm. The nursing industry had a shortage of over 1 million people prior to COVID-19. That shortage has now just been completely exacerbated. And we think about other new industries that we know we're going to have people on board for that takes a relatively a light lift in terms of training, things like contact tracers. People who are actually working in communities to actually share proper information with communities. These are things that we know there needs to be a massive ramp up to get people on board right now for the training aspects. And so how then can we incentivize the usage of federal support for things that are going to create public, private, and philanthropic partnerships that can actually work towards a level of scale and actually prepare our economy for the type of headwinds that we all know we're expecting for at least the next 18 to 24 months.
Well, that's a good segue to just education overall, right? We had John King on the other week, and he's a former Secretary of Education and CEO of the Education Trust, and he noted that come September, young people may not have been in school since February, assuming schools open. Today's college signing day, right? So how many young people are actually going to be enrolling in the fall or heading to school underprepared or ill-equipped to begin? How do you think this is playing out with education in general? You're probably running an elementary school in your living room like I am, right? But we're fortunate enough to have the technology, the data, the needs we have, right? but so many communities don't have digital access. They don't have connectivity. Most of those families, their parents are probably the frontline workers that are actually still going on public transportation and putting themselves in danger. And are those kids even logging in or tuning in, right? Like how much are we setting ourselves back with our young people today with education? How are you thinking about that?
Hugely, and you're, by the way, you're absolutely right. I feel like more elementary that's going on in our house now. It's funny. I think in the initial days, our kids who are 8 and 6 thought this was cool, like the whole novelty of it. I think after about week 2, our son came up to us and he's like, "Can I transfer back to my old school?"
Yeah.
I think he's about done.
I think there's a lot of appreciation for the teachers in this country, because I'm barely qualified to handle lunch duty and gym. That's all I gotta tell you, Wes. Our teachers, if any other silver lining, I mean, real appreciation for the work they do in the classrooms every single day. But
God bless them. God bless them now and always. And but you're right. I mean, one of the big things that we spend a lot of time on is things like it's the summer slide, right? It's what happens during the summer months for so many kids if we don't have summer enhancements that could actually help them. But we're now not talking about kids who aren't in school from June until September. We're talking about kids who might not be in school from February until, and we're still not even certain on the fall yet, or what the fall is going to look like. So I think, so there needs to be a tremendous amount of work done because, the gaps that did exist before, again, we're now putting a massive microscope on it. And in many ways, we're watching them continue to be blown apart.
Yeah.
I think there's a few different things that from both a federal and a state level that we need to push for and we have to be able to advocate for. First of all, part of the challenge is just basic access to technology and basic access to Wi-Fi. 25% of children have not even logged on. In terms of homeschooling. And so you're watching now weeks and months of students who have not even had access to the information simply because they don't have access to Wi-Fi and have access to hardware. That must change. And it should have actually changed prior, but there needs to be a true national push around it. And so when we're talking about further uses of capital, when we're talking about additional stimulus programs, how we think about education has got to be inside of that and making sure that we're putting students on a proper platform. The second thing is we've got to make sure that we're supporting our teachers and our educators, our principals and our counselors to be able to not just deal with the educational challenge of thinking about distance learning, but also thinking about the mental health challenges that also are going to come along with this. We cannot pretend like the strains and the traumas that our students are seeing in their homes right now when you're having an unemployment rate that is literally in a matter of weeks going from 3.7% to now we're targeting upwards of 30%. We can't pretend like those traumas that exist are not being felt by our children, who then have to internalize that while also having to learn math and science and English and reading. Yeah. And so as we're putting all that stuff together, thinking about the ways we're going to smartly use these next months to be able to train up our educators, to be able to, to train up our principals, to do all the things that we need to do to get them all the supports that they need to make sure that the fall, in whatever shape the fall has to look like, that there needs to be a seamless transition. And I think that third piece that we then have to factor in is this actually gives us a really powerful opportunity to not just come up with a way of rethinking of a curriculum, but also a rethinking of how exactly can we implement that within our children. How do we rethink everything from how we're thinking about school year and what is a traditional school year when you know that much of this is going to be online and or distance? How do we think about basic mechanisms of what type of aspects should be in curriculum, and how do we bring families into the educational process? Because we also have to remember, I absolutely love my children's teachers. I love our principal. I think they're doing a fantastic job. I also know that part of that educational weight has now been placed on my wife and I. Yeah. And we take it gladly. Yeah. But also think about the amount of parents and the supports that we also want to give to make this a holistic experience. Because for many parents who now, or guardians, who find themselves in situations as being now they're teachers' assistants, right? Now they're the ones who are helping put together schedules. Now they're the ones thinking about how do I factor in recess and lunch before they have their reading class, or whatever the case might be. The ability to know that it's not just
Oh, I think you froze there for a second, Wes.
Principles, sort of a true whole, especially take place in a fashion that I think for all of our governors and our mayors and those in Washington, we have a unique opportunity now to be able to have that bigger, broader conversation.
Yeah. Well, look, hopefully the silver lining of a lot of this is that we're shining a light on so many of these problems, whether it's the digital divide, access to data that'll help kind of inform better decision making,
Yep.
whether it's understanding that so many challenges in this country tend to be logistical. Uh,
Yes.
we were talking about like a food crisis, the fact that there's dumping of milk and eggs and all this when there's people hungry. We don't have hunger in this country because of famine. It's a logistical kind of issue. We're so grateful for you taking the time today, Wes. I mean, you and the team at Robin are doing such incredible stuff, and any excuse to have you on is always fun, my friend.
Hey man, I just wanted an excuse to see you and see that you're good and healthy.
I am around.
This is good.
Well, look, I want to thank you again. To everyone tuning in and watching, this is Wes Moore with the Robin Hood Foundation. We're grateful for his time today. Our next coffee talk is Tuesday, May 5th. We're going to have Jonathan Glickman, the former president of MGM Motion Picture Group. We're going to Hollywood virtually. We're going to see the impact on the entertainment industry. And then on May 11th, we have Susan Clark, the president of the United States Chamber of Commerce, coming on. So we're going to continue to have these talks and try to get some exciting topics and conversations covered. So Wes, stay home, stop the spread, save lives, my man. Good to see you.
Great to see you, man. Great to see you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Talk soon.